Hello, everybody, and welcome. This will be our second last episode in this series on dissolving shame and pain, and I'm here with the beautiful Katie Hamilton. And today, so we've decided, or we felt, or we feel that it's really important to go more into the energy of shame, the mechanics of shame, how it works, how it looks, how it's used, all of these things, because it's something that's like somewhat insidious in our culture and very pervasive, and it's somewhat hard to detect. And we just want to go into a little bit of the nitty gritty details on shame, and just look more into it so that we bring more awareness to it, we bring more light to it, and we bring it into our conscious mind, our consciousness, so that we can love it up real good, and integrate it into our system, or clear it from our system, so that we can operate in wholeness and from our knowing and connection to our innate goodness and divinity. So that's what we are going to dive into today, and I will let Katie start us off.
Thanks, Em. Upon tuning into our talk today, I was really reflecting on how shame, one, has impacted my life, but it's like quite overtly impacting, we'll just keep it to Canada right now, Canadians. And before I go there, I want to sort of define and create some boundaries for what shame is. I know we talked about it in an earlier talk, but it's kind of like elusive in a way. It's kind of like, what is it? If someone was to just stop you and ask, first of all, I'm curious what the viewers, what's your definition of shame? How do you relate to shame? How have you experienced shame? What's your perception of it? And for me, when I was doing this little contemplation, it is something that we give to each other. It's not innate. Humans don't actually come in born feeling bad and wrong and feeling separate from God. But very soon into our human experience, we experience shame. And the shame, even just of being separate from our mother. I actually heard a teacher say that's when shame can begin, when we start to realize that we're separate from our mother, that the feeling of shame can actually begin. So it's essentially the feeling of separation from God and our goodness. So it is telling us that we are bad and wrong, and there's something fundamentally wrong with us at the core of our being. Our beingness is wrong. Our essence is wrong, not our behavior. Shame isn't about behavior. It's about you, your being. Your being is wrong. And so in a darker shadow world, which we've decided to come here and experience a lot of, shame is a brilliant tool for controlling behavior. And this is where we get into the mechanisms or the mechanics of shame. So if I was to tell Emily that she to shame her, to put shame right on her right now, most likely Emily is going to start to feel contraction and embarrassment, and then start to feel undeserving of love. It's like a part of contracting. We just start to push love away. And if I was to start scolding her in any way, she might even believe that she deserves the punishment that I'm delivering because she's done something bad and wrong. She is bad and wrong. Therefore, what's coming at her, I guess I deserve, so I'll just take it. And that's one way that our prime minister has used it. We'll get into that example. Religious heads use it. Culturally, the norms to get people to conform to cultural norms. Society uses it. Our teachers have used it. Our parents have used it. Our peer groups use it to control people's behavior. not for love and light though. So shame is never ever used for love and light or comes from love and light. It is like a service to self type of thing. If I want someone to feel bad, if I want them to do something, most likely, if I don't just ask them from love and light, there's going to be some sort of shaming of them, which will control the behavior. Does any of that ring true? What jumps
Well,
out?
yeah, what I would add to that is that it would be useless. It, like the tool or the way that it's used, it essentially would be useless if people didn't have a belief or program underneath in their consciousness that states to them that I am bad, I am wrong, or I'm unworthy of love, or any of these things. So the only way that shame is actually a useful tool is because people have underlying belief systems that they are bad, that they are wrong. And so that's really what we need to address when we're looking at shame, is the underlying belief or program that I'm bad, I'm wrong. Because I'll give you an example. If somebody is telling you, is attempting to shame you in whatever way, if you don't have that underlying belief or program, it will not work. It won't move you to do the things that you know, are intentionalized behind that use of that let's say emotional weapon or tool. So if I don't have any belief or program about being bad, and maybe it's just in one area or another area, then it essentially is it's useless. It won't work for me. And I'll give an example. And that just comes from like knowing oneself, right? It's like, I know my inherent goodness. I know my intentions. I know my motivations. I know where I'm coming from. And that in and of itself is enough to give you a sense of self-love or self-esteem. And when you have that, when you're connected to that, it's basically impossible for anyone to put their idea of what is right or wrong onto you. And an example would be like, let's say mask shaming. Okay, so mask shaming, people have been told that if people don't wear masks, it's because they don't care about other people, they're selfish, they are out to just hurt or harm or kill other people, and they don't care if other people die, you know, they're going to kill granny or whatever. That is a tool, a technique being used to shame people into a certain behavior. Now, myself, and I know a bunch of others, we know that that's not the case. We know that there's a deeper reasoning for us. You know, we're connected to our sense of self enough, and our sense of wholeness, our sense of goodness, our sense of, let's say, rightness. And we have a strong enough connection to that the shaming from people, even if it's a mass amount of people, doesn't touch us. It doesn't influence us, you know. Sure, it's like, you know, maybe there's pain around being misunderstood to such a degree and just projected upon, right? Because it's uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. But it hasn't been, and it never will be enough to make people like myself or, you know, other people in other, you know, let's say examples, do something that goes against what we feel is right. And there's a higher understanding of, you know, and so that's just one example. It's like a huge example because it's relevant to these times. But when you have that connection and knowledge of your goodness, the shame does not work. So that's all I would add to that.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, you know, from someone who's been like doing a lot of work, like you've been doing a lot of work on yourself to like dissolve that, right? When we're children, we don't have that level of discernment in our mental capacity. So we literally just take it. Like it's like called shame dumping, and our parents will just dump their shame, not even knowing, just dump shame that they have onto the children. And that's where those beliefs actually stem from. So those beliefs either have come in from past lives because you've chosen as a soul to work with them and dissolve them, or they've actually been just given to you by your parents. And so again, that always goes back to the work we're doing of like shadow hunting and dissolving those beliefs, but also knowing that if they're operating, which they really are for the majority of humanity right now, they're operating in the system, because we're sort of like on the leading edge of this, right? So the majority of humanity and the power hungry control humans who don't want to give up those places, whether it's like microcosm in our community or macrocosm, like a governing system of a country, they know that this is in the operating system of a human, like, and that's how you can create divide, and that's how you actually can create wars, because you other the person who is wrong and bad, therefore you justify killing them. Like this is used was used in Vietnam War, like to literally like program minds to think, yeah, they're the other, they're wrong, they're bad, and so therefore let's justify killing them and rooting for that.
Yeah. So this is a tactic for this is a tactic used in psychological warfare, right? Because there's a lot of deep programming about the bad and wrong thing, and acknowledge that what's the scariest, most like deepest fear of humanity is to be segregated or exiled from the herd, right? It's like to be the other, right? And that equals death for in a lot of cases, right? So the best way to, let's say, quote unquote, control a population is to create these structures of what's right and what's wrong, and play off of that underlying shame or program underneath in people's subconscious minds, and utilize that for power over and to create, like you said, more division. And it's quite fucking effective. Because I would say like there's a majority of the people have this program and underlying either fear and or program running. So they don't want to be the bad person. They don't want to be like the person who's like out there killing people, killing granny because they're not wearing a mask, or like they're doing something for the greater good. That's been told to them that is the thing that's good, right? Like it depends who's telling the story, whether it really is or not. But that's the whole like virtue signaling stuff that we see happening right now, right? People are being told from so-called authority figures that something is good and something is bad. And when that tactic's being used, because the underlying shame program is there's like, our ego tries to protect it in a way. Our ego tries to prevent us from feeling that within ourselves. So we have so many like kind of protective layers protecting us from actually seeing that or acknowledging that and feeling that within ourselves. And so what do? We become the righteous ones. We become the ones who are good and right, and we know best because we've been told what is good and what is bad. And so we align to what's good. And that saves us from having to feel a sense of like, oh my God, okay, if I'm bad, then what does that mean? If I do the bad thing, what does that mean about me? And what it means about me is that I'm bad or wrong, right? And that's a painful fucking thing to feel. But once you feel that, we can go through the process of integrating that and clearing that and remembering and connecting to the truth, which is that we are God, we are from God, we are of God, we are love. And therefore that dissolves the whole thing, and therefore dissolves any sort of influence or control one might have over our behaviors and choices, because we now are uncontrollable or unmanipulatable.
So Emily and I can attest to this throughout the whole COVID narrative. And it just wasn't worth going out for dinner to betray ourselves, or it just wasn't worth whatever family feuds to save the family feuds to betray ourselves. So what happens is we betray ourselves in order to satisfy whatever narrative is what is good. And so ideally, not ideally, but what's happening, pure sovereignty and wholeness means that we are operating from our own belief system, from our own connection to God and our own soul's determination of our body and what we desire and our actions and our behaviors. And just taking it out of the COVID narrative, but like we see this in religion, shaming people for having sex before marriage, just that simple. And the incredible amount of pain and shame and, family feuding that, can cause, like, it's just like that in and of itself. So whatever it is, the overall idea here is that we dissolve, like Emily said, the root belief systems that perhaps were handed down to us when we were a child, that we're undeserving, that we're bad and wrong, we deserve punishment, and we're terrified of being ostracized from our community. You are always going to meet people who align with where you're at. Like, if it's not these people, it's going to be other people. And for a period of time, it might just be you and your soul, and that's okay. But ultimately, where we're going is being able to be fully and authentic to ourselves first and foremost, and not controllable by others. That's really important place. That's an important aspect of designing the new earth, right? Is that humans are operating from their truth. And, I don't even know how many times shame worked on me, but it did until it didn't.
And so Katie, I'd love for you to give an example of like what something that might happen as a kid that would lead to the conclusion that I'm bad or I'm wrong. Like give an example or how that might arise in someone's consciousness as a child or baby.
So when a parent would tell their kid, punish their child for something they did, and rather than break apart the behavior from the person, from the little child, it's like, you're wrong, you're bad, Johnny, or Katie, like, you messed up big, and now you're going to go to your room and you're in trouble, and I'm going to withhold love. And it's like the amount of sensation that goes through a child's body with that energy is too much, and they actually disassociate. But they feel instantly, oh my God, like I'm separate from love. I'm not worth your love. Really, Katie or Johnny just needs to be told that behavior was not appropriate, or that behavior hurts someone else, right? Often that behavior is actually a parent just totally exhausted, and nothing that the child is doing is bad and wrong at all. They're just being their energized child, beautiful, expressive being, but their parent wants quiet. Their parent wants them to be orderly. Their parent wants something from them that is not innate to a child's psyche or mentality. So that what do? They punish them, and it's like they didn't even do anything actually out of goodness or out of alignment of goodness. They didn't even do anything in alignment with dark shadow. So like often kids are just being themselves, and they are being shamed for it. You're too loud, Katie, you're making too much. Oh, and now all of a sudden if I hear that, it's like, oh my God, like like a shock therapy goes through me, and yet that's just who I am. Like loud and big energy, but it's bad, and it's wrong, and it's not appropriate. So then I start attracting people throughout my life repeating that to me, and I still feel small in that. Meanwhile, my energy is meant to be big, so this is this sort of like really nuanced, insidious ways, but often parents are shaming their kids for behavior that's not even technically wrong and out of alignment with love itself. It's just they're exhausted, or they don't want that.
Yeah.
Right. So
and it could be something as simple as like neglect too. Like it could be like, I'm not getting the love that I need or want, or the attention or affection that I need or want.
Yes.
And like in your consciousness, you come to you make that mean something. You come to the conclusion of like, oh, that must mean like there's something wrong with me, right? Or like if I'm not getting my needs met in some way, that must mean there's something wrong with me. I'm not lovable, or I'm not, good enough, or I'm not, something like that. It could be like something simple like that, but there's like a line of like, well, needing to make sense of something in our reality, right? It's like, because our minds as a kid, we can't make sense of these things, but on some level we're trying to like compute, okay, well, this isn't happening, or this is happening to me. And why would that be like, it doesn't make sense why that would be happening to me. But so I have to try to make sense of that, right? It's like, okay, well, and if it's like people like we love, or like our parents that we look up to and we see them as like gods or whatever, right? It's like, well, they can't be wrong. It can't be something they're doing, right? It has to be something that I'm doing wrong, or that it's because of me, why my needs aren't getting met, or this or that is happening, or I'm being punished, right? It's because of me. And so we internalize that and we make it mean something about ourselves. And I would say that we've all probably done that. So underlying all the different layers of things that we experience in this lifetime is that very I don't want to say basic, but just like a fundamental belief about ourselves that we are bad or we are wrong or whatnot. And so it's a huge layered kind of effect, but because that is so painful, we usually cut ourselves off from any feeling or knowing of that there in our consciousness. And
we're more controllable, because if I'm bad and wrong and a parent can withhold love, the next time I'm not going to be so loud automatically, because I don't want love to be taken away. My dad left my life at age 3. It had nothing to do with me, but I absolutely created a storyline very young that there is something seriously wrong with me for my dad to want to leave my life. Like, I am seriously flawed. So I'll just take whatever love comes my way. I'll just take scraps. I'll just take and accept like really inappropriate relationships in my life, because at least that's something better than nothing. And these are the damaging effects of the ego storylines that can continue to create the same trauma that we didn't want in the first place. So, and they will actually create offshoots and branches and not nice flowers, but they'll create gnarly tasting fruits, because then there's new storylines created, another ego storyline. But this is all the ego. The ego is trying to make sense. The higher self, God part of you, your soul, higher self consciousness always knows that wasn't the case, but the ego mind is trying to make sense of it. So I'm so curious, as we move into the new earth and new beings come into the world, if they had this sort of experience, if they would perceive it differently, because maybe their ego structure is going to start to change. But I know from the ego structure that our generation and our parents' generation is very shame based. It's always about us. It's just well, there's something wrong with us then, right?
And this is actually what creates blame too, because it's well, we don't want to take responsibility for the bad thing that happened or whatever, because it's if we take responsibility for that, then that reinforces the idea, or it activates the feeling within us that we're bad, that we're wrong, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. So we say, no, you did something wrong. You did that. You did this, and we can't actually accept responsibility for things because it touches such a deep wound within us. And so that creates, well, we see what that creates on the world, on the planet, right? We've got all these people operating from an unconscious shame-based shadow, right? Because whatever we experience in our lives is whatever we're told, let's say, is bad or wrong and unacceptable. We throw that back into our subconscious, right? We disconnect from that because we can't be bad or wrong. So we disconnect from that, we put it in our subconscious mind. And then what happens is we become separated from a part of ourselves. And we have a lot of resistance and charge to feeling those things. So what happens is that starts infiltrating and moving out into the world, right? Through sideways, through different, it has to come out somehow, right? So it comes out of our subconscious minds into the world. And it's like that Carl Jung quote, which is as long as the unconscious remains unconscious, it'll move into your world. And somehow, I'm probably misquoting this, but you'll call it fate, right? Because you won't.
Let me get it up. It's really good.
Yeah, because you won't see that it's actually coming from your subconscious, trying to make its way into your consciousness, right? So this is what happens. So let's say, for example, we make things bad or wrong, right? Let's say you're greedy, you're lazy, you're mean, you're ugly, you're all the things that we make
You're
bad or
fat.
wrong. You're fat. Like any,
I mean, that's one of the most shame-based ways, right? But
Yeah.
isn't that one of the most shame-based ways to get women to buy any beauty products or do any sort of like fast diet? It's like wronging and shaming being over what people call fat or overweight or having fat on their body in general.
Exactly. Or you're selfish or you're egotistical, whatever it is, right? We put all those things, we pack them back into our shadow and our subconscious mind because we're like, oh, we can't be those things. Those things are bad or wrong, right? And we can't be bad or wrong. So we put that back in there. And then what happens is we start acting those things out unconsciously. And we're like, why did I act like that? I'm not like that. Why did I say that thing? Why did I do this thing? Right? That's not me. But what happens is when that occurs in our lives, it's like, it's a prompt for us to be like, oh, maybe I am those things. Maybe I can be those things, but not to make it wrong or bad, right? And then the process of integration is like accepting and acknowledging, accepting and loving those things in and not separating those things with such strong resistance. And so once we do that, we integrate those shadow aspects into our wholeness. And therefore we don't have to act those things out or play those things out. People in our lives don't have to show up to reflect those things back to us, and then we become this whole being, which means we move more into our sovereign state. And that's really what this whole journey is about, right? It's about meeting those things that within us that feel bad or wrong, loving, accepting those things, integrating and holding those things, or different types of doing clearing work. And then through that, we become a whole sovereign being because there's nothing that we're in resistance to, because it doesn't make us bad or wrong if we are those things, you see? So that's like, yeah. If we make those things bad or wrong, it's like, no, I'm not that. And then that keeps those things in resistance to us. So anyway, we see a world that's kind of foundationally built upon these things, and everyone's egos, or let's say subconscious programming or whatever, is playing off of each other, right? It's like where there's so much shame, there's a lot of pain around that shame, and so we're blaming each other for things. We're not accepting responsibility for things. We're shaming the negatives, so-called negative things, into the background. And what's happening is it's coming up in our face to really show us, okay, this is there.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it? You're going to keep shaming it and putting it in the back of the room? Nuh-uh, it's going to come right back out, and even bigger and louder, which is happening on the planet right now. So yeah.
That's a really, really good point, that it comes out bigger and louder. I know personally, whatever I judge intensely, and I have a lot of charge and sensation around, comes in my life, I'll either do it or someone will do it. And I'll be like, oh my God, that's so bad and wrong. And I'm like, oh, look at that. And I'm like having to bring into my heart the very behavior that I deeply said is so wrong and so bad. And how could anyone do it? And then all of a sudden I'm doing it. I'm like, wow, this is a gift, because anything I have strong judgment to is going to come up into my awareness, so that I drop the judgment, the charge itself. And why? Because judging is withholding love. So anything that we are withholding love from, anything, a murderer, like, this is really hard to accept, but Prime Creator is not withholding love from any of us, no matter how far we've decided to go into the shadow and what experiences we've chosen to have in this free will universe. It's not like Yeshua taught about this. It's like, he's hanging out with the person who nailed him to the cross, like in the afterlife out there. Like it's really wild for us humans, because we've just held such dichotomy of what's right and wrong. And it's very adolescent. So we are stunted at the adolescent mind frame. It's black and white. But to evolve into a spiritual adult mind frame requires a complete dissolving of that consciousness of black and white. This or that. Wrong or right. And until we start doing that within our own consciousness and metabolizing all of those pieces in our own consciousness, we are going to be stunted at that level of consciousness, and we're going to create realities at that level of consciousness. So if we're interested in experiencing something new on this earth, then we're going to have to evolve into our spiritual adulthood consciousness, which is a expanded consciousness where love touches all things. All things are welcome in. And then from that place, we can discern through love how we want to behave, how we want to treat each other, how I want to be treated. And because I have no feeling of bad and wrong or deserving punishment or undeserving, in that level of consciousness, there is no vocabulary for worthiness, because worth is inherent to who you are as a soul, right? Like, and that's where we're going. That's where a lot of us are system busters, to, like Emily and I, to have these conversations, just to illuminate something that might be so in the dark for you that this is even operating in your world, or you are perpetuating it. And now you have a choice, once it's illuminated, to choose something different, to go in and dissolve those belief programs that are serving shame, if you want to move into a spiritual adulthood, right? We all have to. There's no bypassing this. Emily and I are doing it like very, very diligently within our own consciousness. And I bet already Emily and I are having experiences, I know personally I am, that are showing me how much I've dissolved a lot of my shame and undeserving. And I'm actually opening up, as our teacher, one of our teachers, Jillian Pothier, talks about, opening up the aperture or dilating to receiving more. One of the biggest feminine woundings with shame is that we close our energy off, because we do not, but we literally, like as she says, cock block abundance, because we do not believe we are worthy of it. We do not believe we're deserving. This is adolescent consciousness. This is not spiritual adult. A spiritual adult knows their inherent worth of receiving everything and more.
Yeah. And like Katie was saying, like, it is hard in some ways to detect when this is active or present, right? And one of the best indications that there's shame of this nature, of like when we get down to the bottom of it, it's I'm bad or I'm wrong, is when we're in judgment. So we can actually use, if we have awareness of when we are judging someone, right? This is important, right? This is like a journey of awareness, a journey of consciousness, and expanding that and becoming more aware, right? Gaining greater awareness of our thoughts and our body and our sensations and all of these things. This is the path. We can become aware of when we're in judgment towards another, and usually it doesn't feel good in our system, right? It feels kind of like contracting, right? It kind of like tightens up in our system. So if we're aware, if we have awareness of when we're in judgment towards another, we can use that as an indication that, okay, there's shame somewhere. That's an indication that I'm ashamed of something. So we can look at, like, what are we judging someone for, right? This is a great practice of like being able to see like what's going on in here. If I'm judging this person as that or this, that means there's shame about that or that within me. And so then we can get into the process of really accepting those things. So first is awareness, then there's acknowledgement, then there's acceptance of that and love. And those are the energies that help to dissolve these things or integrate these things into our consciousness, into our being. And therefore, we become, like I said, healed or whole and more sovereign in our energy field. So that's the process and journey that we're all on, right? Because this is the journey of sovereignty, the journey of liberation, of, like Katie's saying, spiritual maturity. We're moving into, or attempting, well, we are, we're in this process of moving into our spiritual maturity and spiritual adulthood. And so that looks like we're taking personal responsibility for the things that we think, say, and do. And anything that comes up in resistance or judgment or projection, blame, all of these things, we use as an indication that there's something going on there, and we move into that and we go towards those things. And that's this journey of, so like, quote unquote, enlightenment, right?
I love it. And very well said. And something that just sort of dropped into my awareness. An example, would be, let's take schoolgirls for an example. So the adolescent, like example. So you've got someone in this group, let's say there's like 10 or so girls in this group, and someone does something that one of the other girls deems as bad and wrong. Do they sit down and have a healing circle and listen to each other and talk about it and love each other in the thing, even if it was missing the mark on goodness? Do they do that? No. They will use that to ostracize and outcast and often declare more dominance in the circle, because they are the holder of what is bad and wrong, and they get to determine who's part of this group. And then all the other girls get scared and they start sort of like bowing down to that person. This is what tyrants do. This is what dictatorship is. And so when we move out of that, and we're seeing this more normalized in men's and in the world of like, schoolgirls, but as adults, so we're having men's circles and women's circles, or men and women's circles, that like 10 years ago, you would basically be like, what is that? And now it's like mainstream media stuff. And it's so beautiful, because the mechanics of that is that it's bringing humans to a place where they get to share stuff that they've been ashamed of and hiding in the darkness. They get to bring it forward and encircle with everyone holding a space of love, feel loved for that. And when I watch, and me myself, like I've watched this in circles, I'm like, what is the mechanic behind that? Oh my God, the thing that someone was so terrified of sharing with another, and they're not losing a friendship. Someone's not turning a cheek to them. They're literally holding space for them and loving them while they, create like, confession, it's like confession time, but it's like, you're loved, even
being
in
vulnerable.
That.
It's like being vulnerable. It's allowing yourself to be vulnerable and be seen.
But not just that, you are, and we're now creating a culture where we don't run from that person. We don't, right? Like the adolescent, like now they're shunned. Oh God, no, you're out of the group. It's actually now becoming more cultural accepted that you don't shun someone out of the group. That who is anyone to throw stones, because we've all missed the mark on our behavior. So this is what I love that's coming more into the forefront of men, like within men and women, like feminine and masculine, is just to be able to speak the shame body out loud, the thing that you would never want your best friend to hear, but like your best friend's still going to love you through it. That is one of the biggest gifts we can give each other. If you don't necessarily know how to do it for yourself, start doing it for someone else, and then you could do it for yourself. But like, hold space for someone, and don't judge them when they tell you something that is not born from love, and like love them in that, because that is the quickest way for that person to dissolve that behavior. The behaviors,
and if you can't notice that and see what's going on in your consciousness, why you can't do that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And it doesn't mean you condone it just by holding space. It doesn't mean you're saying keep doing it. It means that you're just holding a neutral space of love. And yes, if you can't, then what a cool opportunity to see what judgments you're holding inside of yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think an important thing to note too is that we've come into this. So this whole thing is universal in a way. So it really, when we acknowledge the shame, when we see it, when we witness it, when we accept it, when we share about it, right? It's like, we have to acknowledge that, like, that's not us, actually. Like, we are not that. And it's actually something that we've all kind of come into. So like, if we kind of take a meta look at the planet and like the energetic templates or energetic influences on this planet, we've come in to I don't want to say experience, but we've come in to kind of expose these darker things to the light, right? To be revealed into the light. And through that's us kind of clearing them. And so not to identify with the things that come up for us, right? Because actually those things, are as part of our journey as an individual, but also as a collective, as humanity, because we've decided that at this time, that kind of denser, darker, heavier energies of shame and whatnot, guilt, all these things, they need to be exposed to the light and therefore transmuted. And so that's basically the work that we're doing. So we can actually acknowledge that within our own beings, right? And not overly identify with the fact, oh, I feel shame. And even us feeling shame can cause shame, right? It's like, oh, I feel shame, which means like I don't love myself, which, oh my God, that creates shame, because it's like I want other people to think that like I love myself and I value myself and I know my worth and value and blah blah blah, right? Because that's like, you know, kind of out there is like the be all end all right now. So even just having shame can feel shameful, right? And so yeah, it is liberating to acknowledge that and to come to terms with that, and to also know that like that's not who you are, it's what you've kind of taken on in some way. And just like we take that on, we have when we become aware of it, right, we have the ability to release or transmute, expose and transmute. So the only way that shame can operate is in the darkness. That's the only way, in the unconscious, in the dark, with no light. And so the process of moving, informing ourselves and moving towards it, that is the thing that is going to bring it to the light and transmute it so that we can be free of that. And that's the point.
Yeah. Practically, like I was just thinking for viewers, like, okay, so what's something they could take away on a practical level? If someone's speaking to you in a way that's like passive aggressive or like straight up aggressive and like shaming you, even in, we could just take a mask example. You know, a friend was walking through Home Hardware and someone was just shaming her. And I forget exactly what he said, but something like, I guess you don't care about anyone else other than yourself. Prime example of a shaming tactic. And you just feel like, right? So shaming behavior comes your way, notice your contraction, notice the kind of gut punch, and then take a moment, and that's the moment where you can be like, actually, no, I don't receive your shame, because it's something someone's giving to you, but they're like throwing it onto you, and you actually say like, I'm going to give that back. So whether you can even communicate with that person, maybe they're gone, but in your mind, you can be like, I don't accept, and I don't believe or accept your comment on me. I have nothing but goodwill for humanity. And this is my choice, because I personally just don't believe that a mask is actually stopping any contraction of any virus. Like whatever your belief is, you're entitled to your belief, right? They're like basically shaming your belief and saying theirs is better, and it's not true. So in that moment, when someone does something or says something and you feel the contraction, that's the moment you want to remove yourself and go in and check in, like, oh, do I have a judgment on myself a little bit there? Like, do I believe that like what I'm doing is harming people? And then you get to dissolve that, work with that, and come back to love and be like, no, I'm making this choice because I genuinely do not believe I'm going to harm another person. Like, I just don't believe in this narrative. And you have every right for that. And I think that, you know, and many other examples will come in, not just COVID. It's just the easiest one to use right now. But like, right? Like when
it's a big, because it's a huge shame party. That's why. It's
a huge shame party. Yeah. But I really feel like there's the moment where something, and it just happened to me, where like someone said something and boom, it just like struck a chord of shame. I'm bad and wrong. I should have invited them, but I didn't. And I had my reasons why I didn't want to. But the passive aggressive and this shame-based, like, and then I was, whoa, wait a second. I don't need to engage in ego here. I don't need to engage in this at all. I have every right not to have invited this person. She has every right to speak to me about her feelings about it, but she didn't. She just dumped a shame-based comment. And I was like, I don't accept it. When you want to speak to me from your heart, I will absolutely have a conversation. So it was that simple, and it dissipated. Whereas my other friend was spoken to her and it's still running through her mind because she's taking it on as if it's true, that there was something wrong that she did and that she's bad and wrong. And so it's firing up all the shame in her. And so two people, same comment came through a Facebook message to both of us. and we're both having different experiences. Me a while ago, I would have spiraled out. I would have felt awful for days. It would have bothered me for days. But I was able to just see it for what it was, see this person who's hurt, which is fine, no judgment. But I don't welcome your egotistical, shame-based communication. It's not welcome. That's a firm boundary.
It's like you don't have anything for it to stick to anymore, right? It's like once you do, a significant portion of this work and you get to the bottom base layers of this kind of stuff, like we're talking about, which is I am bad, I'm wrong, and start doing the work around that. It won't, when people attempt to do that, it won't activate you anymore. It has nowhere to stick anymore. So you will have a different response. Either you'll just kind of turn and walk away and like, there'll be nothing to say or do.
See it for what it is. See it for what it is. It's theirs. You don't take it on as yours. That moment is pivotal. It's so cool. Yeah,
but it's good. It's good for you to share those two different experiences, right? It's like, and we're also not pushing it away so that we don't have to feel our shame.
No,
like you have to be careful that we're not pushing something away to avoid something, right?
Yeah,
you can allow it to be there, and if there's no rub in you, there's no place for it to land or match with you, then it's not going to be something you need to deal with. But you can also use this as an opportunity, right, to say, oh, is there any place in me that feels like bad that I hurt somebody, or that I whatever, and then you can go into that and work with that. And it can also just be that, like, okay, you've cleared a significant amount of that, and it's not rubbing you the same way as it is your friend, because your friend is like still operating from these shame-based programs and attempting to be a good person, so to speak, by doing the right things, and is not being looked at that way. And so it's very triggering, right?
Yeah, that's it. We're not being looked at that way. Oh my God. So then we've externalized our reputation versus just having a solid reputation with myself, right? It's like, and love for myself. If I wanted to purposefully exclude a person who I don't enjoy their ego-based programs, which are quite often, and I just genuinely didn't want that at this event. And so I have every right. And so I did get triggered a bit. There was a tiny trigger that did bring up. And then I was like, I see you, I'm with you. And what do you have to say? And it was exactly what you said. I am bad and wrong if I hurt another. And then I realized I don't hurt anyone. I do behaviors. My behavior, my choice was not to invite someone. She chose to be hurt or not. I've been not invited to all her events around here for a long time, and I choose not to get hurt. So she was hurt, and she could come and talk to me, and I would have been happy to talk to her, right? And so I think that's what's really cool. Is so then I got to see the program that I'm bad and wrong if I hurt another. And I was like, no, I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I did this to honor myself. There was a reason I didn't invite this person, and I have every right to that. So it's also claiming the rightfulness of our choices as well. So,
as a free and sovereign person, you make choices based on what's true for you, right? And hopefully we get to that place where we don't have, like, where we're not making choices from trying to avoid something, or because we're triggered by something, or trying to get back and retaliate at somebody for something, or because we want to like I said, like, avoid a feeling that this person or experience brings up. It's simply what's true for us, right? With no resistance to anything. It's like, okay, this is actually true for this person to be here or not be here. And if that choice brings up shame or guilt within us, to look at that and then go back and say, oh, is this a true choice? It likely is, but we want to make sure that we're not either making the choice to invite them so that we avoid that within us, and that we're not making the choice to not invite them so that we avoid feeling something, right? So there's awareness on both sides of this that needs to be, but essentially it's just self-awareness of like, okay, where am I truly coming from? Is it like a true sovereign choice, which means there's no resistance, there's no triggers, there's no like basically emotions. We're not making a choice based on like from our emotions, And therefore that would be in alignment with the highest good for everybody, right? And if somebody has an issue with that, then that's okay. We just understand that that's just a process for them, and actually we're in service to them. So then there's no guilt or shame, right? It's just knowing that, like, if it's the highest choice, it's in service to them if they react or get triggered by it. So, that's that's being in your sovereignty, that's being in liberation, right? Because there's no altering our decision based on trying to avoid one thing or another from another person.
Yeah. It's really simple. It's not interested in being around that energy. Like, it's that simple. And we had a conscious decision, and we made a conscious choice. And then the email ended up getting to her anyways, which I kind of had a feeling would. And if we had invited this person, I knew it would have been out of guilt. It would have been out of, well, let's avoid this sort of like, energy.
Well, this is where the energy of people pleasing comes in, right? And I know a lot of people participate in people pleasing. It's like, I don't want to upset, I don't want to rock the boat, I don't want to do something that upsets somebody, because again, what does it come down to? If I do, what does it mean about me? Right?
People pleasing is an offshoot protection mechanism to get love at the expense of betraying oneself.
Exactly.
That's what it is. And so I've spent 5 conscious years actually dissolving my people pleaser, because that's how I got, I thought I would get love, right? And the attention I needed. So it was really freeing. And so when I did like address that one little sort of and then address that and dissolve that within me, I just felt so clean and clear. So if she shows up to the event, I'm clean and clear. I know exactly why I did what I did. I've got no guilt about it. And I'm totally okay to have a real conversation from the heart. But if that energy comes at me from the ego or judgment or shame, that's a no. That's a non-conversation. I'm not engaging in that. So it was just so empowering. And I know that was for me. That's a really powerful, these situations show up to show us where we are at. Without the outer world showing up, how would we know where we're at in our growth and where there's more growth? So like, what a gift for me, gift for her if she wants to use it, gift for my friend if she wants to use it. And oftentimes people don't use it, and just recycles more pain. So we're like pain interrupters. That's what we're, system busters, and we're here to like interrupt pain with tooling. In our next series, we'll get into the actual tooling of how to use these, like how to use your like most painful experiences as gold, like creating gold in your life. Right now, we're just really getting into the nitty gritty of the pain and shame body.
So, okay. Well, I think that gives a good understanding and clarity of what it looks like in our lives and how we act from there a lot of the times. And just, my suggestion or encouragement would just be to like really notice, like get really like aware of when this stuff is active, and use like what we talked about, with the judgments and the blame and all that, to see where you're doing that, like become aware of where that's happening in your life, and then use that as an indication or information feedback in order to go in and do some self-reflecting and exploration, because I guarantee you this is there somewhere in your consciousness. This is there, and clearing this or healing this or integrating this will liberate your consciousness and drastically change your life and this planet. So that's all I really have to say about this.
And thank you for doing the work, to all humans watching this who are on the path, because it's the work towards the sovereign freedom that we're looking for, and to be able to play in different energies that are really like nourishing to the body.
Yes. And don't shame the shame. Don't shame the shame. Yeah. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in. If you stuck with us this far, and we shall see you in our next and last episode for the series. We'll see you again next week.